Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the coffee mug on the table, its ceramic warmth grounding him in the morning stillness. Outside, clouds loomed, promising rain, but it wasn't the sky that unsettled him. It was the constant, frantic scratching coming from the far end of his living room. The sound had started 2 days ago. His golden-furred companion, Ranger, a fiercely loyal German Shepherd mix, had been fixated on one particular section of the wall ever since. First, Ethan had laughed it off. "Must be a mouse," he'd muttered, inspecting the drywall for signs of chewing or movement. Nothing. No sounds behind it, no damage, not even a scent Ranger should have picked up. But the dog wouldn't let it go. Every few minutes, he'd return, scratching and whining with a desperation Ethan hadn't seen before. This morning was different, more intense. Ranger's usual soft, frustrated pawing had become a full-blown frenzy. Whines turned into howls, claws into battering rams. "Ranger," Ethan called, spilling a bit of coffee as he stood. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't budge, his entire body tense as he braced himself against the wall, eyes wild with urgency. Ethan knelt beside him, placing a firm hand on the thick ruff of fur around his neck. Hey, it's okay. I'll check again. All right?" But Ranger didn't calm. He growled. A low, vibrating growl that Ethan had only heard once before, the night a stranger had wandered too close to their porch. Something was wrong. Ethan placed his ear against the wall. Silence. He closed his eyes, focusing. There. A sound. Barely audible. A small, trembling breath. Then, was that a sob? He jolted back, his blood suddenly ice in his veins. No, he must have imagined it. He had to be losing his mind. But Ranger whined again, scratching furiously. That was all the confirmation Ethan needed. His hands worked quickly, pulling tools from the garage. The crowbar felt unfamiliar in his grip, heavy and cold. He hesitated for only a second before driving it into the drywall. The crack was deafening. Dust bloomed in the air as he pulled a jagged chunk free, revealing insulation and darkness behind. Ranger barked sharply, lunging forward. Ethan widened the hole with a few more heaves, coughing as debris filled his lungs. Then he saw her. Nestled inside the tight space between the walls was a small figure, so still he feared she might not be alive. A little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her skin was pale, her clothes tattered and clinging to her thin frame. Tangled blonde hair fell over her face, dirt and dried tears streaking her cheeks. She sat curled up like a frightened animal, knees to chest, hands trembling. Ethan froze. Every part of his body screamed at him to act, but his mind was stuck, trying to piece together something that didn't make sense. "Hey," he finally whispered. "It's okay. You're safe now." The girl didn't move at first. Her body was so tightly drawn in that she almost looked like a part of the wall. But then, slowly, her head lifted. Blue eyes. Hollow. Haunted. Ranger whimpered and carefully stepped forward, his ears back, his body low to the ground. He nudged his nose toward her and something changed. The girl's hands moved just a fraction, reaching out until her fingers grazed the soft fur on Ranger's head. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "What's your name?" he asked gently, still kneeling. Her lips parted, barely more than a whisper. "Sophie." "Okay, Sophie. I'm Ethan. This is Ranger." He gestured toward the dog. "We're here to help." Her fingers tangled into Ranger's fur, clinging like he was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Ethan wanted to call the police, to get help, to scream at someone for letting this happen. But he hesitated. Sophie's eyes, when he mentioned the word safe, had flickered with something that wasn't relief. It was terror. He pulled back, raising his hands. "It's okay. You don't have to say anything right now. Just come out of there. Let me help." It took nearly a minute, but Sophie finally shifted, inching forward. Ethan reached out, gripping her tiny arms and gently guiding her through the broken wall and into the light. She was impossibly light, malnourished, afraid. Ranger stayed close as Ethan carried her to the couch, setting her down gently. Sophie didn't speak, but she didn't let go of the dog. Ethan didn't press her with questions. Not yet. He fetched her a glass of water, a blanket, and a peanut butter sandwich. The only thing he had left in the pantry that didn't require heating up. Sophie took the sandwich in small bites, her gaze never leaving the dog. Ethan sat across from her, thoughts spiraling. Who had put her there? Why was she hiding? And why didn't she want the police? Do you have parents, Sophie? He asked, testing the waters. She shook her head, barely. No one. He tried again. Her lower lip trembled, but she didn't speak, just held tighter to Ranger. He sighed and leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. Whatever had happened to her, it wasn't a mistake. Someone had meant for her to be hidden. Ethan stood, pacing toward the kitchen. He picked up his phone, hovered over the keypad. He should call it in. He should. But when he looked back at the couch and saw Sophie asleep with her head resting on Ranger's flank, a different instinct overpowered the logical one. He couldn't bring strangers into this. Not yet. Instead, he sat on the armchair across from her and watched, guarded, waiting, and praying that whoever had hurt her didn't come looking. The morning light spilled in gently through the kitchen window, casting long golden beams across the table where Ethan sat, hands clasped, eyes staring into nothing. The events of the previous night replayed over and over in his mind, the cracking drywall, the terrified girl, and the way Ranger had known, somehow, that something was wrong. That something was hidden. Ethan had seen a lot in his time. As a former field medic turned wilderness survivalist, he'd pulled people out of twisted wreckage, seen the haunted stares of trauma victims, and patched wounds most wouldn't believe could be survived. But Sophie, what he saw in that little girl's eyes, was different. This wasn't just fear. It was something buried deeper, like a ghost trying to stay quiet. The sound of small feet on hardwood pulled him from his thoughts. He turned as Sophie appeared at the doorway, her oversized sweater swallowing her tiny frame. She rubbed her eyes, blinking against the light. Morning, Ethan said gently, rising to grab the kettle. You like tea? Or cocoa? Sophie hesitated, then pointed toward the cup in his hand. What's that? Black coffee. Bitter as it gets. You wouldn't like it, he smiled. Let me make you something better. She nodded almost imperceptibly, then slid onto one of the chairs. Her hand found Ranger's fur almost instinctively as he sat beside her, his tail tapping once in greeting. Ethan poured warm milk into a mug and stirred in cocoa powder until the kitchen smelled like comfort. He set it in front of her, then took his seat across the table, studying her carefully. She sipped, holding the cup with both hands like it was keeping her grounded. I'm not going to ask questions you don't want to answer, he said after a pause, but I do need to know if anyone is looking for you. Someone who might hurt you. Someone we should be worried about. Sophie said nothing. Her eyes dropped to the table, the steam from her cup fogging the space between them. Ethan sighed. You're safe here, Sophie. But I need to be prepared. She didn't speak. Instead, she slowly reached into the kangaroo pocket of her sweater and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. Ethan leaned forward and she handed it to him with trembling fingers. He unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing. Childlike, colored with crayons, stick figures of a girl, a tall man with a frown, and a small dog that looked vaguely like Ranger. But what caught his attention was the house drawn behind them. It was large, with dark windows and barbed fences sketched in red around it. In the corner, written in shaky, uneven letters, he said, if I scream, I disappear like the others. Ethan's grip on the paper tightened. Sophie, he said slowly, who is he? She didn't answer, but her eyes filled with tears. Ranger let out a soft whine and placed his head in her lap. She buried her fingers in his fur, clutching tightly. It was clear that whatever Sophie had escaped was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Ethan stood suddenly and began moving around the house, checking locks, pulling out the old hunting rifle he kept in a case in the closet. He hadn't fired it in years, but he remembered how. The steel felt cold in his hands as he cleaned it with practiced care. Sophie watched in silence, her cup now forgotten. That afternoon, Ethan walked the perimeter of his property. His house sat at the edge of old forest land, peaceful, quiet, with no neighbors for at least a mile. He scanned the tree line, his instincts gnawing at him like an itch under the skin. Someone had put Sophie in that wall. And that someone might come back. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard, Sophie opened up. Just a little. He had a mask, she whispered while lying on the couch, Ranger curled beside her. Ethan sat in the armchair, barely breathing. He wore it when he came into the rooms. I wasn't supposed to look, but I did once. Ethan's voice caught in his throat. Where was this, Sophie? A place with halls, she said. Lots of kids. but they started to disappear. One by one. Then it was just me. And he said, her voice broke. He said if I ever ran, I'd disappear too. He'd erase me. Ethan's skin prickled. This wasn't just some abusive foster home. This was organized. Controlled. Like some covert facility. How did you get out? He asked gently. Sophie looked at him. I didn't. The dog found me. Ranger, who had been dozing lightly, perked his ears and blinked up. What do you mean? Ethan frowned. There was a noise outside. The wall shook. I thought it was them coming back. But then she turned toward Ranger and hugged him tightly. He started barking. And then you found me. Ethan rubbed his jaw, thinking, had Ranger heard something through the wall? Or had someone been trying to retrieve her? The idea made his blood run cold. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window with the rifle resting across his lap, Ranger at his side. The wind rustled the trees, but nothing else stirred. Until 3:12 a.m. A soft crunch outside. Ethan held his breath. Ranger's ears stood straight, his body low and tense. A shadow moved across the porch. Ethan was up in a flash, heart pounding, rifle trained toward the sound. But when he threw open the front door, there was nothing there. No figure, no footsteps, just the distant rustling of leaves. But something was off. The gate that led to the woods was open. Ethan never left that gate open. He shut it and locked it tight. Then he moved inside, checking on Sophie. Still sound asleep, her breath even. Ranger now laying beside her again like nothing happened. But Ethan knew better. Someone had been there. And whoever they were, they weren't going to stop. The next morning came quietly, as if the forest were holding its breath. Ethan hadn't slept at all. He remained seated near the window, the rifle never far from reach, watching for movement. Every now and then Ranger would glance up at him with those knowing eyes, as if to say, I've got your back. Sophie stirred on the couch as sunlight began filtering in through the curtains. She yawned softly, rubbing her eyes, then sat up with a start. Her gaze darted around until it landed on Ethan. It's okay, he said gently. You're safe. She nodded but didn't smile. Ethan walked to the kitchen and poured a bowl of cereal, dry, no milk. It was all he had for now. Sophie took it with a quiet thank you, then leaned down to give Ranger a soft scratch behind the ears. Last night, Ethan began, someone was here. Sophie's spoon paused midair. They didn't break in, but they were on the porch. I heard them. Ranger heard them. Her lips parted, but no words came. I need to know more about the man who locked you away, Ethan said. We're not going to hide forever, Sophie. We need to be ready. She bit her lip and looked down at the cereal. He was in charge. He wore gloves all the time. Like medical gloves? Ethan's brows furrowed. Medical? He said I was special. That's why I had to be quiet. That's why they picked me. A chill crept up Ethan's spine. Who else was there? Other kids. But they weren't there long. Her eyes were wide now. They always left in the middle of the night. Ranger sat up, ears twitching. Ethan crouched in front of her. Did you ever hear a name? Anything? She nodded. Dr. K? That was something. He stood, pulled out his laptop from the drawer, and opened it. His internet connection here in the woods was spotty at best, but with some luck, he could run a few queries through the encrypted network he used to contact an old friend from his field medic days, a former intelligence analyst named Marcus. He typed out a message, urgent, need background on possible black site child facility. Name mentioned, Dr. K. Children removed. Possible medical experimentation. Any leaks or ghost files? Then he hit send. That afternoon, Ethan took Sophie and Ranger for a short walk down a quiet wooded trail near the back of the property. Sophie walked slowly, eyes scanning the forest like it might whisper secrets back to her. You lived out here alone? She asked suddenly. Yeah, Ethan said. Moved out after everything in the city felt loud. I like quiet, she replied. But not the kind behind walls. Ranger stopped abruptly, nose in the air. His body tensed. What is it, boy? Ethan whispered. Then the softest sound, crunching leaves. Not theirs. He moved quickly, scooping Sophie into his arms and ducking behind a fallen log. Ranger followed, keeping low. Footsteps. 2. Maybe 3 sets. Moving slowly, deliberately. Ethan didn't wait. He signaled to Ranger, who darted off toward the right, drawing attention with a series of barks. The footsteps shifted, the intruders turning toward the noise. Ethan made his move, sprinting back toward the house with Sophie clutched tightly. They reached the porch in seconds, and he threw open the door, slamming it shut behind them and locking it. Sophie was shaking. "They're here." "I know," Ethan said, breathing hard. "But now I know where they're coming from." An hour later, Marcus replied, "Found something buried deep. Rumors of a facility known as Project Echo, linked to private contractors, medical testing, and unsanctioned child experiments. Operated under a fake foster system. Multiple children disappeared over 6 years. Dr. K, not listed officially, but a Carl Hyson shows up in whispered chatter on darknet forums. Possible link. Extremely dangerous. High clearance. Not a lone actor. Jack, whatever you've stepped into, it's bigger than you think. Get out. Get her out." Ethan stared at the screen. Project Echo. He looked toward the living room, where Sophie sat cross-legged, playing with Ranger's ears. She didn't know the weight of what she'd escaped from. But he did now, and it changed everything. They needed a plan, not just to run but to fight back. Ethan grabbed a pen and notepad, his brain already cycling through his old contacts. Survivalists, off-grid allies, anyone who could give them a head start. Sophie was no longer just a lost girl. She was a target. And Ethan? He was the only shield she had. The following day began with an unsettling stillness. Even the birds, normally chirping at dawn, seemed to hold their breath. Ethan stood by the window, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, eyes locked on the tree line beyond his porch. He had triple-checked every lock, reinforced the doors, and kept the rifle within arm's reach. Ranger had slept by the front door all night, his body tense even in rest. Sophie was still sleeping, curled up under a blanket on the couch, one hand resting on the dog's side. Ethan was no longer just worried. He was preparing for war. Around mid-morning, Sophie finally stirred. She yawned, wiped her eyes, and sat up with a soft groan. "Did anything happen?" "No," Ethan replied. "Quiet night." She seemed relieved, but Ethan wasn't. He'd lived through too many ambushes. The quiet before the storm was the most dangerous kind. As Sophie sat at the table with a bowl of reheated oatmeal, Ethan's satellite phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Found something." Dr. Carl Hyson used to work under DoD biotech grants, classified projects. His clearance was revoked 5 years ago after an ethics scandal. Went dark. No criminal charges filed. Rumors say he disappeared with classified subjects. Jack, he's part of a private contractor network. They're dirty, well-funded, and off the books. They won't stop until they get the girl. You need to vanish. Ethan stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. "Vanish," he muttered under his breath. "Not yet." By noon, Ethan decided to head into town. They were running low on supplies, canned food, batteries, fuel. He didn't want to leave Sophie alone, but he had no choice. "I'll be gone 2 hours," he told her. "Ranger stays with you. You do not open that door for anyone. You hear me?" She nodded. "What if they come?" "Then Ranger will buy you enough time to hide. Use the crawl space I showed you behind the laundry wall." Sophie's face paled, but she nodded again. Ethan knelt and gave her a quick hug, then looked Ranger dead in the eye. "Watch her," he said. The dog gave a low, obedient whine. Ethan loaded his gear and drove off in his old pickup, heart racing. Every car he passed, every pair of eyes felt like they lingered too long. He reached the general store on the outskirts of a nearby town. It was small, local, only 2 other customers inside. He moved quickly, grabbing supplies, using cash only. But as he exited the store, bags in hand, he spotted it. A black sedan, parked across the street. Tinted windows, engine running. His pulse spiked. He pretended not to notice and casually walked to his truck, placed the bags inside, then adjusted the rearview mirror. The sedan didn't move. He started the engine and slowly pulled out. So did the sedan. Ethan didn't drive home. Not directly. Instead, he took the long way, down old service roads, up winding hills, and through narrow passes lined with thick pine. He checked the mirror every few seconds. The sedan followed. No mistake. He pulled off suddenly onto an overgrown path and killed the engine. Hopped out, grabbed his rifle from behind the seat and ducked into the trees. His boots made almost no sound against the pine-covered forest floor. The black sedan crept past the bend and slowed. Ethan waited, hidden behind a thick pine trunk, breath still. A man stepped out, tall, black tactical jacket, clean-shaven, Earpiece. Ethan aimed the rifle at his head and shouted, "Hands up!" The man froze, slowly raising his hands. "You're making a mistake. You followed me. Who sent you? I'm not here to hurt you." Or the girl. That confirmed it. He knew about Sophie. Ethan's finger hovered near the trigger. "Start talking. I'm with a security firm. I was hired to bring the girl back. You don't understand, she's valuable. She's not safe with you. She's safer than wherever the hell she came from. She's government property." Those 3 words made Ethan snap. He stepped forward, slammed the man against the car, and pressed the muzzle against his chest. "She's a child. The man struggled for breath. "Dangerous. You have no idea what was done to her. We're not trying to hurt her. We're trying to contain what's already inside." Ethan's grip loosened slightly. "What do you mean, inside?" The man's eyes darted toward the trees. Too late, Ethan realized it was a signal. A shot rang out. The tree behind him splintered. Ethan dove behind the sedan, dragging the man with him and using his body as a shield. Another shot zipped past. Ethan returned fire. Silence. He rolled the man onto the dirt, unconscious from the impact, and retreated into the trees, rifle raised. After several tense minutes, the attackers retreated. Whoever they weren't ready for a full firefight. But now Ethan had answers, and more questions. He returned to the unconscious man and searched his pockets. ID fake. No surprise. Phone locked. He pocketed it. Inside the trunk of the sedan, he found syringes, medical restraints, and a child-sized jacket. Sophie's jacket. His heart sank. He dragged the man into the woods, zip-tied him to a tree, and left him there. "We'll talk again soon," he growled, then vanished into the trees. Back at the cabin, Sophie was waiting, eyes wide. "Are you okay?" she asked. Ethan set the supplies down and nodded. "Yeah, but we've got a problem." She looked down. "They found us. They're closer than we thought." He crouched in front of her and gently placed the jacket on the floor. Sophie stared at it for a moment, then hugged Ranger tightly. "They used to make us wear those. Said they were fireproof. But it wasn't for us. It was for them." Ethan blinked. "Them?" She nodded slowly. Sometimes kids would change. At night, like they weren't themselves. And when they touched things, she looked away. They burned. Ethan sat down slowly. Sophie wasn't just a missing child. She was a secret. A weapon. And now that secret was in his living room. That night, lightning crawled across the sky like veins of fire. The storm rolled in fast, thunder booming through the mountains, shaking the windows of Ethan's cabin. Rain lashed against the roof like it was trying to rip its way in. It felt symbolic, like the world itself was warning him. They were running out of time. Inside, the mood was tense. Sophie sat huddled in her blanket, clutching a cup of warm milk with both hands. She hadn't said a word since Ethan had shown her the jacket they found in the sedan. Ranger was curled at her feet, eyes flicking to the door with every thunderclap. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the burner where a kettle steamed. He was trying to think, strategize, plan their escape. But no matter how far he ran, these people found them. And now he knew why. They weren't just hunting a witness. They were reclaiming a subject. He hated that word. Subject. It made Sophie sound like a science experiment. But that's exactly what she had been. Ethan opened the secured laptop again and sent Marcus another encrypted message. "We need to disappear. Off-grid. No paper trail. No cell networks. Can you get me new IDs, vehicle papers, and a route with no surveillance for 1,000 miles? Also, what is Project Echo really doing?" Marcus replied 30 minutes later, "I'm working on the route and IDs. Give me 24 hours. As for Project Echo, get ready for a nightmare." Experimental human engineering. Started with PTSD therapy and memory suppression trials in orphans. Escalated to cognitive enhancement using illegal neural modulation. Sophie wasn't just an experiment. She was one of the successful ones. They created artificial savants, kids with extreme memory, intuition, and empathy, but their emotions were unstable. The fire? I think that was real. There are claims the first subject triggered combustion under duress. Mental stress caused real, physical chain reactions in their surroundings. They're not just chasing her because she knows too much. They're afraid of what she could become. Ethan leaned back, eyes wide, blood draining from his face. He looked toward Sophie. She was staring at him, as if she knew. He shut the laptop and knelt beside her. Sophie, he began carefully. What happened when the other kids were taken? Did they ever change? She nodded slowly, her eyes unreadable. Sometimes when they got scared. Or mad. One boy, he screamed and everything around him turned red. The guards fell down. I don't know what happened to him after that. They took him away. Did you ever feel anything like that? Sophie looked away. I try not to. Ranger let out a low, comforting grunt, resting his head on her lap. She clung to him like a lifeline. Do you know what they did to you? Ethan asked gently. They gave me pills. They showed me videos. And there was this room. With wires. Every time I answered a question wrong, the lights would flicker. She blinked, remembering. But when I got mad, really mad, the lights would explode. Ethan stood and paced the living room. He had to get her somewhere safe. Somewhere isolated enough for her to breathe, to exist, to be without triggering the fear in others or in herself. Then he remembered something. An old friend. Caleb Nash, a conspiracy journalist turned doomsday bunker builder. The man had dropped off the map years ago, but Ethan had helped save Caleb's brother during a flash flood in Montana. Caleb had promised him a favor for life. It was time to collect. Ethan went back to the laptop and sent one last message to Marcus. Find Caleb Nash. Last known contact in Blackridge, Wyoming. If he's still off-grid, I need a direct line. Marcus's reply was short. Already on it. The storm raged into the night. At 1:38 a.m., Ethan heard something new. A low humming. He sat upright on the couch, grabbed the rifle, and moved toward the front window. In the sky above the treetops, blinking red lights. A drone. Not commercial. Military grade. Silent, fast, with infrared scanning. It hovered for just a second too long before darting away toward the west. They know where we are, Ethan muttered. He locked eyes with Ranger. The dog gave a soft growl as if confirming it. Then, from the back of the cabin, a pop like a fuse blowing. Sophie let out a yelp. Ethan ran to the hallway. The light fixture above Sophie's room had shattered glass everywhere. She stood in the doorway, breathing hard, her pupils dilated. I didn't mean to, she whispered. It's okay, Ethan said, stepping toward her, voice calm. What were you thinking about? They were watching. I could feel it. Her hands trembled. Sparks danced on the tips of her fingers, small static crackles that disappeared as quickly as they came. Ethan gently reached out and took her hands. No one is going to hurt you, he said. She nodded, but the fear in her eyes was still alive, barely contained. Ranger barked. Loud, sharply. Then again. He ran toward the back door. Ethan didn't ask questions. He grabbed Sophie and ran. They reached the truck just as headlights appeared at the top of the road. More than one vehicle. He threw the truck into gear and peeled out, tires spitting mud and gravel. He took the back trail, the one that led through the old Forest Service roads, narrow, uneven, but untraceable. Sophie was breathing hard beside him. Where are we going? She asked. To someone who can help us disappear. Will they find us again? Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. They can try. As they drove deeper into the mountains, the rain finally eased. The last flashes of lightning faded behind them. Ethan checked the GPS tracker he'd rigged from spare parts. The drone had pinged a location before disappearing. That meant one of the cars was armed with a remote link, maybe even autonomous surveillance. But he was betting on time. And terrain. If they could reach the old Blackridge path by sunrise, and if Caleb Nash was still out there, then maybe, just maybe, they'd have a shot. Not just at survival, but at justice. Because Ethan was done running. Now it was time to fight back. The tires of the pickup screeched slightly as Ethan took the final turn down a narrow gravel path. The first hints of morning were painting the sky, streaks of rose and amber bleeding into the ink of night. They'd driven through the dark for hours, evading all known roads, turning off lights when necessary until the road disappeared into the mountains. And now, as the sun edged upward behind them, Ethan saw the old rusted sign, Welcome to Blackridge. Population scratched out. It wasn't a town. Not anymore. Just a name left behind in the dirt. Sophie stirred in the passenger seat, Ranger's head resting across her lap. Are we there? We're close, Ethan replied, his voice gravelly from hours of tension and caffeine. If Caleb's still out here, we'll find him. What if he's not? Ethan didn't answer. He pressed down on the accelerator. The town was nothing but bones, wooden planks eaten by weather, cracked concrete, shattered windows. Years ago, a fire had gutted half the main street. The other half had simply faded. Ethan remembered the stories. Government land grab. Environmental contamination. Locals forced to leave. But Caleb Nash stayed. The man had gone full prepper after the death of his brother. He believed in black helicopters, shadow governments, psychic warfare. At the time, Ethan had thought he was paranoid. Yeah? He was hoping that paranoia had built them a fortress. They stopped at a rusted gate near the edge of town. Ethan got out and approached a camera mounted on a crooked pole. He looked up and said, "It's Ethan. You owe me." For a long time, nothing happened. Then a crackling speaker came to life. I knew this day would come. A buzz. The gate creaked open. Sophie clutched Ranger's fur as the truck rolled forward. Beyond the gate was something out of a post-apocalyptic film, an underground entrance carved into the hill behind a crumbling gas station. Solar panels lined the ridge. Rainwater barrels. Surveillance towers camouflaged in pine trees. Caleb Nash didn't just believe in the end of the world. He built for it. Inside the bunker, Caleb looked exactly the same. Long gray beard, wild eyes, and a revolver at his hip. He wore patched-up flannel and a bulletproof vest like it was a fashion statement. "You brought company," he muttered, nodding toward Sophie. "She's the reason I'm here." Caleb didn't ask questions. Instead, he led them down into the bunker. A series of reinforced tunnels and steel-lined rooms filled with generators, canned food, and racks of survival gear. Sophie looked around, wide-eyed. "This is underground?" Caleb chuckled. "Built it myself. 5 years, for near-death experiences, and 1 illegal backhoe. Can we stay?" she asked. Caleb turned to Ethan. "Depends. Who's after her?" Ethan hesitated. Then, Project Echo. The room fell silent. Caleb's face darkened. "You serious?" "Dead." Caleb leaned back, exhaling sharply. "I thought that was just a rumor. Brainwashed kids. Mind training. Experimental military psychology." Ethan nodded grimly. "It's real. And she's one of them." Sophie looked down, ashamed. Ranger leaned against her. "She's not a weapon," Ethan said quickly. "She's a kid. But they did something to her. And now they want her back." Caleb stared at Sophie. Then he turned and opened a steel door at the end of the hallway. "Then let's give them something they don't expect." The next few days passed in fragments, moments of rest broken by tension. Ethan and Caleb fortified the outer perimeter, added motion sensors, and ran drills. Ranger patrolled like a soldier on watch. Sophie, meanwhile, explored the bunker with silent curiosity, sticking close to Ethan whenever possible. But the nightmares started again. Sophie would wake up crying, breath shallow, her body sometimes sparking with a strange electric pulse. Lights in the hallway flickered. Water glasses cracked on the table. Something inside her was growing. Not evil, but wild, untamed. Ethan tried everything. Talking, journaling, giving her drawing supplies. But nothing helped. The trauma was too fresh, too deep. Then one night, as the wind howled outside and Ranger paced restlessly, Sophie came to Ethan's room. "I remembered something," she said quietly. He sat up. "What?" "Dr. K. He used to talk to someone. A woman. He called her the Key. He said she was the one who knew how to control us. She wore gloves, always smiled, but her eyes were empty." Ethan frowned. "Do you remember her name?" "No, but she wore a red pendant. Always." That detail stuck. The next morning, Ethan relayed it to Marcus. "Woman, red pendant, codename the Key. Cross-reference Project Echo." Marcus replied within the hour. "Got a match. Her name is Dr. Laura Miles, former behavioral scientist at Fort Redwood. Thought she died in a lab accident 5 years ago. New intel says she's working off-grid, possibly overseeing Phase 3. Be careful, Jack. She's not just part of the system. She runs it now." Ethan stared at the screen. They weren't just fighting a shadow operation. They were fighting its queen. And she was coming. That evening, Sophie stood by the observation deck, watching the wood sway in the wind. Ranger stood beside her, as always. "Do you think I'm dangerous?" she asked softly. Ethan stepped beside her. "No, you're lying. I'm hopeful." Sophie smiled sadly. "I don't want to be a weapon." "You're not. You're a survivor." She turned to him. "What if I can't control it?" "Then we learn how. Together." And for the first time, Sophie nodded, not because she had to, but because she believed it. For now, they had shelter, a plan, and a promise. But the storm hadn't passed. It was gathering just beyond the treeline, waiting. The darkness outside Caleb's bunker felt heavier that night, as if the forest itself knew something was coming. Inside, tension gripped the air. Ethan sat in the surveillance room with Caleb, studying motion sensor logs. The infrared cameras showed nothing but swaying trees, flitting birds, and the occasional deer. But something felt wrong. Sophie hadn't said a word all day. Not after breakfast. Not after her usual walk around the solar perimeter with Ranger. And not after Ethan had brought her the sketchbook she'd asked for. She was silent. Withdrawn. Watching. Like she was waiting for something. Caleb leaned back in his chair. You ever consider she's not just scared, but pre-triggered? Ethan frowned. What does that mean? I had a buddy in the Corps, Caleb said. Special Division. Black Ops. They had kids too, Jack, once born into war zones. They trained them to trigger responses under emotional thresholds. Anger. Fear. Betrayal. These weren't just kids. They were switchblades. She's not a weapon. No. But someone tried to make her one. Ethan looked through the glass wall at the common area. Sophie sat on the floor, drawing Ranger beside her. The dog hadn't left her side all day. She still flinches if someone raises their voice, Ethan whispered. She sleeps in a ball like she's trying to disappear. But yeah, sometimes when she's afraid, things break. Lights? Devices. I saw her shadow flicker across 3 walls once when she panicked. Caleb grunted. That ain't normal. And if it ain't normal, it's been engineered. That night, Marcus sent another encrypted message. Confirmation, Dr. Laura Miles is leading Phase 3 of Project Echo. Facility located in Utah Desert, classified airspace buried beneath decommissioned test range. Rumored to contain the second generation of Echo children. They consider Sophie a rogue primary. A threat to containment. Their solution is a recall. Or termination. Ethan's stomach dropped. Termination. That was the plan now. Not to retrieve. To erase. He turned to Caleb. We need to move. Not in a few days. Now. Caleb didn't argue. You want to disappear permanently? No. I want to go after them. Caleb blinked. You're insane. No, Ethan replied. I'm tired of running. I want to end this. Sophie had given him purpose. She wasn't just someone to protect anymore. She was the key to exposing all of it. And maybe undoing what had been done to her. Later, Ethan sat beside Sophie on the floor, watching her draw. She'd filled the pages with eerie, beautiful images, a shadowy man with needles for fingers, a red-eyed woman with a glowing necklace, a room filled with mirrors and fire. These are memories, Ethan said softly. Sophie didn't look up. They're pieces. They come back when I dream. Can I ask you something? She nodded. If you could stop them, if you could stop what they're doing to the other kids, would you? She hesitated. Then, yes. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small old dog tag. It was Caleb's brother's. Then we start tomorrow. The plan was risky, reckless, but it was the only one they had. Ethan, Caleb, and Sophie would travel separately to avoid detection. They'd meet near the Utah border, just outside a Navajo ghost town where Caleb had once mapped underground tunnels connected to the Echo facility. Marcus was feeding them live intel, satellite gaps, patrol schedules, drone flight windows. They had a 48-hour window to breach the site. The goal wasn't to destroy it. It was to expose it, and to rescue anyone still inside. But deep down, Ethan knew they were walking into a hornet's nest, and not all of them might walk back out. That night, just before Ethan went to bed, he found Sophie standing in the dark hallway. Can I ask you something? She whispered. Anything. If I lose control, if I become like them, will you still protect me? Ethan knelt to meet her eye level. Always. No matter what. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Then I'll fight too, she whispered. And right there, Ethan knew the trigger protocol Project Echo had built into her was about to be overwritten by courage, not control. By choice. They left before dawn. A convoy of one, Ethan in a dusty, tan SUV with Sophie and Ranger in the back seat, and Caleb taking the lead in a weathered camper van outfitted with a hidden surveillance rig and radio intercept gear. It felt like something from another lifetime. Like Ethan was back in the field again. Except this time his mission wasn't political or military. It was personal. Sophie slept most of the ride, her head resting against Ranger's shoulder. The dog hadn't so much as blinked in the last hour, his eyes glued to the windows. Caleb's voice crackled through the radio. 2 hours out from Navajo Ridge. You holding up? Ethan pressed the mic. So far. You sure she's ready? Ethan looked in the rearview mirror. She's already survived more than we ever trained for. By the time they arrived at the edge of the Navajo ghost town, the landscape had changed. Endless desert stretched out, cracked and broken, dotted with red canyons and faded wooden structures. They parked in a crumbling service station with no roof and set up inside. Sophie walked quietly through the wreckage, stopping at a broken window to watch the wind swirl dust across the abandoned road. She's watching the sky, Caleb muttered, like she's listening to something we can't hear. She is, Ethan replied. That night, under the cover of stars, they mapped their route to the Echo facility. The underground compound, according to Marcus, was buried beneath what used to be Fort Garnet, a weapons testing range that had been officially decommissioned years ago, but satellite heat maps showed otherwise. Hidden air vents, electric signatures, pulse beacons. There's a tunnel system here, Caleb said, pointing to a jagged portion of canyon wall. Old mining shaft that cuts under the ridge. Used to be an escape route during Cold War drills. We get in through there. Ethan nodded. Extraction? Caleb grinned. I'll work on that after we survive infiltration. Sophie, sitting cross-legged with Ranger beside her, stared at the map. What happens if I see them? She asked. You don't talk. You don't move unless I say so, Ethan said firmly. What if I change? Then you remember what I told you. She looked up at him. You're not what they made you. You're what you choose to become. She nodded, and they began to move. The entrance to the tunnel lay behind a rock slide, one Caleb cleared with surprising ease. The opening led into a narrow shaft, reinforced with rusted steel beams and rotten planks. The air was dry stale. They moved single file, Caleb first, then Ethan and Sophie, Ranger taking rear. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the breach point. And when they did, everything changed. The tunnel opened into a reinforced airlock, new metal, newer than the rest. Security panels lined the door. It wasn't abandoned. It was active. Ethan pressed a hand to the wall. Marcus said to expect heat sensors. Already triggered them, Caleb muttered, unpacking a tablet from his satchel. I'm jamming their uplink now. We'll have 15, maybe 20 minutes before they know we're in the system. He looked at Sophie. After that, it's you. Sophie didn't hesitate. As Caleb cracked the airlock, she stepped inside the facility first, followed closely by Ethan and Ranger. What they saw froze them in place. White corridors, surveillance domes in the ceiling, and endless rows of small, windowless rooms with reinforced glass doors. Each one held a child. Some were asleep. Others stared at the walls. A few paced, their hands twitching with erratic energy. They're still here, Sophie whispered, horrified. Ethan stepped forward, scanning the corridor. We need proof. Caleb snapped photos, hacked the access logs, and pulled data from the nearest security panel. Then, footsteps. Heavy. Fast. They're coming, Caleb said. Sophie's eyes went wide. Ethan grabbed her hand. Run. They ducked into a side room, an observation chamber, and bolted the door. From the window, they watched as 2 guards passed by, rifles at the ready. Black tactical gear? Red armbands. Not military, Ethan muttered. Private security. Worse, Caleb said. Mercenaries. Ethan turned to Sophie. Do you remember where they kept you? She nodded. Downstairs. Through the mirror room. Caleb blinked. Mirror room. They made us look at ourselves while they tested us. They said the reflections made it easier to trigger our response. Ethan's stomach turned. Where's the server room? Past that. Then that's where we go. They snuck through corridors using ventilation shafts when possible. One by one, they unlocked the children's rooms, giving whispered instructions, stay down. Stay hidden. We'll come back. Finally, they reached the mirror room. It was worse than Sophie remembered. 2-way mirrors lined every wall. In the center of the room stood a glass pod charred inside. Sophie paused, staring at it. That's where he tried to make me change. Ethan moved beside her. We're done letting them win. Suddenly, the alarms blared. Red lights. Sirens. Footsteps. Dozens of them. Time's up, Caleb said. They know. Ethan looked at Sophie. You ready? She turned to him, eyes glowing faintly. Yes. They ran. Into the storm. Sophie ran harder than she ever had before. The echoing clang of boots on steel behind them rang louder with every second. Red lights bathed the hallway like a warning from hell itself. Her heart slammed against her ribs, breath hitching with every step. Ethan was just ahead, one hand gripping her wrist, the other clenched around a pistol taken from a fallen guard. Behind them, Ranger barked fiercely, snapping at shadows, teeth bared. They reached a side hallway, marked only by a black handprint on the wall. Sophie stopped. "This is it," she whispered. "The observation wing." Ethan yanked the door open and ushered them inside. What they found was not what he expected. It was silent, spotless, too clean. The walls were white, padded. The air was cooler, softer, like a surgical suite. There were no guards here, no cameras, just one woman, standing in the center of the room, tall, dressed in a silver lab coat, hair pulled back into a perfect braid. Around her neck, a crimson-red pendant. Sophie froze. Her. The woman smiled. "Sophie, my brilliant star. You came home." Ethan raised his gun. "Move and I put you down." But the woman, Dr. Laura Miles, didn't flinch. She held her arms out slightly, almost welcoming. Her voice was calm, hypnotic. "I don't want to hurt you, Ethan, and I certainly don't want to hurt Sophie. You think you've been protecting her, but you've been delaying her awakening." Sophie backed up. "She's lying." "I'm telling you the truth," Dr. Miles said, stepping forward. "They lied to you about why you were made, about what you're capable of. You're not a weapon. You're a cure." Sophie shook her head violently. No. You told me if I disobeyed, I'd vanish like the others." Miles sighed. "Because the others couldn't contain it. You're the first who could. Don't you see? You're the stabilizer. Without you, this entire generation burns out." Ethan stepped in front of Sophie. "Back away. You think you're her savior?" Miles sneered. "You're just another handler. At least I gave her purpose. You broke her. I built her." In one smooth motion, Miles tapped something on her wrist. Suddenly, a low hum pulsed through the floor. Sophie dropped to her knees, clutching her head. "It's in my brain. She's doing something." "EMP pulse," Caleb growled, bursting through the side door. "You triggered a failsafe." Miles turned in surprise just as Caleb leveled a taser gun at her. He fired. The dart struck her square in the chest. She fell convulsing. Sophie gasped, the hum fading. Ethan scooped her up. "Are you okay?" Sophie's eyes glowed for a second, truly glowed, then dimmed. "I saw it," she whispered. "Everything. The files. The test logs. The children. They were connected to me. Somehow." "You're saying it was all built around you?" Caleb asked. Sophie nodded. "She's not just a survivor," Ethan said quietly. "She was the blueprint." They moved quickly, dragging Miles into a chair and zip-tying her arms. Caleb hooked her tablet into the terminal. She had access to everything. Dozens of files poured onto the screen, evidence of illegal testing, subject logs, body counts. Marcus's voice came through Ethan's earpiece. "Jack, uploading now. This is the motherlode. It's over. Once this hits the servers, they'll have no choice but to shut it all down." Ethan watched Sophie stare at Miles. "I want to ask her something," she said softly. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Sophie walked up to her and knelt. "Why me?" Miles, still weak, opened one eye. "Because you were perfect. Not broken like the rest. Not afraid. We needed a prototype who could survive the surge." "You mean survive being tortured?" "No. I mean survive becoming something more." Sophie stood up slowly. "Then I'm not yours anymore." She turned and walked away, and the pendant around Miles' neck, red and pulsing faintly, shattered into dust. Minutes later, they blew the outer door. The base erupted in flames behind them as they emerged through the emergency escape shaft and into the desert air. Ranger barked once, happily. Sophie smiled. For the first time, truly smiled. "What now?" Caleb asked. "We finish this," Ethan said. "And then?" Sophie asked. Ethan looked down at her. "We start over." They didn't stop running until the compound disappeared behind them, swallowed by smoke, flames, and secrecy. Ethan's boots slammed against the desert ground as he led Sophie and Caleb to the extraction point. A battered communications relay station hidden inside a hollowed-out sandstone ridge. Ranger kept pace, panting, ears alert. The moment they reached the ridge, Marcus's voice came through the earpiece. Got the files. Now give me a signal. We go global. Inside the relay station, dust swirled in beams of morning light. Caleb booted up the transmitter, fingers flying across the controls. This thing still works? Ethan asked. Caleb smirked. Built it myself. Hardwired to uplink through a satellite I borrowed. Sophie leaned against the wall, winded but watching. Her face was streaked with dust and dried tears. Still, she stood tall. Eyes unblinking, hands steady. She wasn't the same girl Ethan had found behind his wall. She was something more now. Not a subject. Not a savior. A signal. As the system powered up, they could see the feed come alive: security footage, experiment logs, voice memos from Dr. Miles, and a dossier labeled Echo 001, Sophia. Caleb opened a channel to Marcus. Uploading now. Then he glanced at Ethan. You sure about this? Ethan looked at Sophie. She nodded. Let them see, she whispered. Within minutes, the files hit the deep web. From there, Marcus routed them to whistleblower platforms, independent media, and human rights organizations. Within 20 minutes, the world began to burn. Hashtags. Outrage. Leaked names of politicians funding the experiments. Parents of missing children demanding answers. International courts launching investigations. One file in particular spread like wildfire, footage of Sophie, aged 5, screaming in a sterile room as her fingertips sparked and glass shattered around her. It was undeniable. And unforgivable. As the world reacted, Caleb turned off the transmitter. Silence settled like ash. Well, he muttered. We're fugitives now. Ethan nodded. We were already. What happens next? Sophie asked. Ethan crouched beside her. Now that they know what you are, they'll try to spin the story. Call it a hoax. A training program gone wrong. But they can't unsee the truth anymore. She looked at him, tired. Will they come after us again? He looked out over the canyon. Yes. But this time, Caleb added, we're not hiding. They burned the last of their tracking equipment that night. Every signal, every link, gone. Then they disappeared. No trail, no credit cards, no cameras. Gone like ghosts. 2 weeks later, in a safe house deep in British Columbia, Ethan poured Sophie a cup of tea. She was calmer now. No more sparks. No more night terrors. Just quiet. Ranger lay on the porch, his tail lazily thumping. Caleb was out restocking supplies. Though Ethan suspected he missed the thrill of hacking government black sites more than he let on. Sophie sat with a notebook, scribbling something. What are you writing? Ethan asked. A story, she said. About what? About a girl who was made to be a weapon but chose to be something else. Ethan smiled. Does she win? Sophie looked up. She survives. Later that night, the radio clicked. Marcus's voice came through. They're scattering. Every Echo site is being investigated. Some are burning their own records. They're afraid. You started something, Jack. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I didn't start it, he said. She did. 3 months passed. No explosions. No alarms. No armed men kicking in the door. Just snow. Falling gently across the rooftops of a tiny Canadian mountain village where no one asked questions and no one looked twice at the man with the soldier's posture and the girl who barely spoke but always smiled at dogs. Ethan had grown a beard. Sophie had grown stronger. Caleb, despite complaining about the cold, had turned the attic into a secure comms hub powered by solar panels and scavenged tech. From there, they monitored chatter. Drones. Unmarked helicopters. Satellite sweeps. Nothing. Not a trace of Project Echo. At least not above ground. They've gone underground, Caleb said one night over dinner. Erased the names. Relabeled the programs. New branding. Same rot. Ethan chewed his food slowly. What about Dr. Miles? Gone. Vanished after the compound burn. My guess? They either hid her, or she's running the next phase from the shadows. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we're not finished. Sophie looked up from her soup. I don't want to run forever. You won't, Ethan said. But we can't let them keep doing it to other kids either, she whispered. Ranger let out a low bark. A sound of agreement. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Sophie in the clearing behind the cabin. She stood barefoot in the snow, palms open, eyes closed, and around her, the frost lifted. Steam spiraled off the ground in gentle waves. The trees stood still. Time felt paused. When she opened her eyes, she smiled. I'm learning how to stop it. Ethan didn't ask what it meant. He understood. The chaos inside her, once a curse, was now bending to her will. Not because someone forced her, but because she chose to. That week, Marcus made contact again. There's something you need to see. He sent coordinates. South America, a medical vessel off the coast of Peru, disguised as a disease research unit. But inside, rooms too small, hallways too quiet, and power levels too high for a hospital. It's Echo, Marcus said, or whatever they're calling it now. Ethan stared at the map. Sophie walked up beside him. Let's go, she said. He looked at her, older, stronger, clearer. You sure? I need to see it for myself. Ethan nodded. Then we move. The prep took 1 week. New IDs, rerouted flights, a chartered boat, and a plan so fragile it felt like glass in a war zone. Caleb stayed behind. If I go missing, people start asking questions, he said with a wink. Besides, someone's gotta keep the bunker warm. They hugged. No promises. Just trust. And fire in the eyes. The ship was massive, painted in white and green, medical insignias everywhere. But when Ethan and Sophie boarded, disguised as aid workers, it didn't take long to feel the unease. Security was tight. Surveillance was excessive. And the doctors too robotic. Ethan scanned the hallway outside the research lab and whispered, "This feels familiar." Sophie nodded. "It smells like the mirror room." That's when they heard it. A child crying. Muffled. Real. Sophie followed the sound without hesitation. Down 2 levels. Past the authorized only signage. To a steel door marked with an old symbol. E3. Echo Phase 3. Sophie placed her hand on the panel. The door opened. Inside, a room full of beds, each with a child. Some hooked to monitors. Some shivering. Some glowing. Faintly, like Sophie used to. And standing at the far end, clipboard in hand, Dr. Laura Miles. Dr. Laura Miles looked up from her clipboard as the door hissed shut behind Ethan and Sophie. A flicker of surprise passed through her eyes. Genuine, this time. You found me, she said softly, as though greeting an old friend rather than the girl she once tried to control. Ethan raised his pistol. Don't. But she didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, she set the clipboard down slowly and raised her hands. You're here sooner than expected. You knew we'd come? Sophie asked, her voice steady, stronger now. Miles nodded. I hoped. There's a difference. Behind them, the children lay motionless in their beds. IVs in their arms. Electrodes along their temples. Too still. Too quiet. They're stable, Miles said, glancing toward them. For now. You were the proof of concept, Sophie. They're derivatives. Attempts to recreate your calibration. But none have lasted. Sophie stepped forward, each movement like thunder in the silence. You're still doing it. Still experimenting. After everything. No, Miles replied. I'm finishing it. Ethan moved closer to the bed nearest him. The child, maybe 6 or 7, had scars along his wrists and bruises under his eyes. He looked at Miles with hatred. You think finishing means fixing? I think it means control, she said. You want to stop this? Good. Then stop them. Because Project Echo was hijacked, Ethan. Taken over after the fallout. I'm not running it. I'm trying to shut it down from within. Sophie frowned. Why should we believe you? Because I didn't run, Miles said quietly. They told me to disappear. I stayed. I've been buying time. Slowing development. But I can't hold them off forever. The Phase 4 team arrives in a week, men with no morals, no restraint. Once they take over, these kids won't survive. Sophie looked at Ethan. What do you think? She asked. He stared at Miles, thinking back to the bunker, the screaming children, the shattered pendant. I think truth doesn't erase what you did. I don't want forgiveness, Miles said. I want a chance to fix what I helped break. They gave her 1 hour. During that time, she showed them the database. Names. Identities. Children who had disappeared off the radar, orphans, refugees, abandoned wards. All funneled through a hidden algorithm coded to flag emotionally high-risk minors. Every name was tagged, tracked, and transferred to one of 10 Echo sites around the world. 10. Not 1. Not 2. 10. And Sophie was the first. They thought they could replicate her empathy, Miles explained, typing furiously. But without her resilience, the others degraded. Psychotic breaks, catatonia, spontaneous combustion in one case. They're no longer building Echo children. They're building living weapons. And when the next contract hits, Phase 4, they'll be deployed. Deployed where? Ethan asked. Miles looked at him. Wherever chaos is profitable. Ethan's blood ran cold. Sophie stepped beside her, looking at the live feed of the other 9 facilities. They're still active, she whispered. Yes, and now they'll know you were here. Miles handed Ethan a portable drive. All the data, every file. You'll need to get this to Marcus. It'll take them weeks to scrub it, maybe months. It's your best chance. What about you? He asked. Miles paused. I stay. If I leave now, the locks will trigger. But if I override from inside, I can shut down all 10 labs, at least long enough to evacuate the children. You're going to sacrifice yourself? Sophie asked, surprised. Miles nodded. Let's just say I'm correcting a design flaw. They set the charges quietly. Caleb had taught them WEL.
As they rigged the final corridor, Sophie returned to the children, whispering words of comfort into each ear. One by one, Ranger licked their hands. When she reached the last bed, the boy opened his eyes. You're the first one, he whispered, barely audible. We dream about you. Sophie's breath caught in her chest. Then she squeezed his hand. You won't have to anymore. When they left the ship, smoke was already trailing from the ventilation shafts. Miles's voice came through the earpiece one last time. They'll come for you. Ethan answered, let them. The ship exploded 30 minutes later. In the middle of the open sea, under a black sky. Sophie watched the plume rise like a ghost. They'll start again, she said. Yes, Ethan replied. But next time, they won't be in the shadows. And next time, she added, they won't be alone. The boat they used to escape drifted silently across the Pacific. No engines. Just current and sail. The kind of escape that didn't leave footprints. Ethan leaned over the railing, scanning the horizon for anything unnatural, lights, shapes, silhouettes against the moon. There was nothing. Behind him, Sophie sat curled beneath a thick blanket, her back against Ranger, who snored gently despite the faint lapping of waves. She hadn't said much since the explosion. Not even when Ethan had offered food. Not when he wrapped her in the emergency coat. She was thinking. He knew the look well. The calm before the next battle. 3 days later, they reached a quiet harbor in Ecuador. Marcus had arranged papers, identities, transport. But as they sat on the edge of a dusty dock, sipping lukewarm water and eating plain rice, Ethan saw something flicker in Sophie's expression. A memory. You okay? He asked. She nodded slowly. I remember her voice. Dr. Miles? No, someone else. A woman. Younger. She used to read to us at night. Before the needles. She was kind. I think she tried to help, and then she disappeared. Ethan leaned in. What did she look like? Sophie thought. Short hair. Freckles. And she wore bracelets. Lots of them. They jingled. Ethan tapped the encrypted satellite phone and messaged Marcus, cross-reference, Echo Project early staff. Female. Mid-20s. Short hair, bracelets, possibly removed before Phase 2. Marcus replied 10 minutes later, match. Dr. Serena Voss. Behavior specialist. Fired for empathy violations. Never resurfaced. Likely in hiding. Sophie stood up slowly. She's alive. I feel it. Ethan believed her. Their next stop was Santiago. Then Zurich. In each city, they dropped a breadcrumb. A code buried in encrypted networks only the original Echo staff would recognize. One phrase, the prototype seeks the kind one. It was risky. But necessary. If Serena was alive, she would know it was Sophie. And sure enough, a message came within 48 hours. An audio file. Heavily distorted. Just one sentence, I didn't leave. I was erased. And I remember every child's name. Sophie wept. The first tears since Blackridge. Not of fear. But of hope. They arranged a meeting in the Swiss Alps, deep inside a neutral zone, an abandoned observatory overlooking a frozen lake. Ethan and Sophie arrived early. Ranger walked the perimeter. Snow fell lightly, covering their tracks. And at exactly 7:42 p.m., a woman emerged from the trees. Dr. Serena Voss. Older now. Hair longer. But the same eyes. Same bracelets. When she saw Sophie, she froze. You're real, she whispered. Sophie ran into her arms without hesitation. And for the first time since she'd escaped the wall, she felt safe. They stayed hidden for 2 weeks while Serena debriefed Ethan on everything she remembered. Phase 1 was observation and mimicry training. Phase 2 introduced sensory deprivation and emotional control via trauma. Phase 3, weaponization. And Sophie? Sophie had survived all 3. Not because of suppression. But because of resistance. She was never controllable, Serena said. She was luminous. Even in the worst moments, the other children looked to her. Echo didn't build her. They underestimated her. Sophie looked up. I want to go back. Ethan and Serena stared at her. Back where? Ethan asked. Not to the place. To the others. I want to find them. The ones who got out. Who ran. Who might still be scared. Ethan understood. You don't want to fight the system anymore. She shook her head. I want to rebuild what it tried to destroy. That night, they sat around a fire beneath the stars. Serena showed Sophie how to decode old Echo messages. Ethan stitched together a map of rumored survivors, children who had once glowed like Sophie, who had vanished into alleys, orphanages, woods. And slowly, the story began to change. From revenge. To recovery. From silence. To signal. The news broke quietly. At first, just whispers on the French forums. Then encrypted file drops to whistleblower groups. Then scattered radio broadcasts across abandoned frequencies. They're alive. The Echo children are alive. And they're coming home. Somewhere in Berlin, a teenager with glowing eyes stepped into the sunlight for the first time in years. In Morocco, a girl who could feel heartbeats from across a room wept as a voice crackled through her makeshift headset. You're not broken. You're one of us. In a village outside Seoul, a boy once called a demon because he could melt metal with his mind found coordinates etched into the back of a school textbook, sent by someone who had once been where he was. The world didn't notice. But the children did. They remembered the pain. The rooms. The silence. And now, for the first time, they felt something new. Connection. From their hideout in northern Norway, Sophie and Serena built what they called the network. No names. No hierarchy. Just signal and shelter. Ethan handled logistics, safe houses, encrypted gear, and routes so complicated even Caleb needed 2 maps to follow them. Serena did outreach, locating the lost, comforting the scared, decoding behavioral patterns the children couldn't name but had lived for years. And Sophie? Sophie became the voice. Not loud. Not famous. But felt. Her recorded messages, calm, soft-spoken, filled with truth, were passed from ear to ear like gospel. You're not what they made you. You're what you choose to become. It echoed in 10 countries. And lit sparks in hearts that had long gone dark. But with the network's growth came risk. One day, a coded alert came through, baseline breach, Amsterdam. A safe house had been hit. No casualties. But ransacked. Tracked. Ethan tightened the straps on his gear. They're trying to find her again. They won't, Serena said. She's never in one place long enough. But they'll keep trying. Sophie listened, quiet. Then said, let them. Serena frowned. What do you mean? Sophie met Ethan's eyes. We make them come to us. The plan was simple. And dangerous. They would stage a fake gathering, a decoy meeting of networked children, in the ruins of an old monastery in the French Pyrenees. No real Echo children. Just Ethan, Serena, a few operatives they trusted, and Sophie. She insisted on being there. Ethan resisted. But he knew better than to underestimate her resolve. It's not a trap, she told him. It's a mirror. The night of the gathering, snow fell again. Like memory. They lit fires in metal drums, tuned radios to static, and waited. At exactly 1:13 a.m., headlights broke the fog. 2 black SUVs. No plates. Just shadow. Ethan watched from the bell tower, rifle in hand. Serena stood behind the altar, hands raised in peace. Sophie waited in the nave. Alone. And when the doors creaked open, the figure who stepped inside wasn't military. Or corporate. Or Dr. Miles. It was a girl. 14, maybe 15. Pale. Shivering. Eyes wide with fear and rage. She was glowing. Faintly. Like Sophie had. She stared at Sophie in disbelief. They said you were dead. Sophie stepped forward. I'm not. Neither are you. The girl trembled. They said if I ever left, I'd burn out. Then it's time to burn them out instead, Sophie said gently. The girl sobbed once, then collapsed into her arms. Outside, the SUVs vanished. They'd never meant to engage. They came to observe. And left realizing their control was gone. The children had a leader now. Not a commander. But a beacon. And she glowed brighter than anything they could contain. It began, as all revolutions do, with a whisper. Across mountaintops, beneath city ruins, inside silent forests, and behind unmarked doors, children once forgotten began to rise, not with fists or fire, but with truth. They were the ghosts of Project Echo. But now, they had a name. A face. A signal. Sophie. From a cabin in New Zealand, a child who hadn't spoken in 3 years wrote the word Sophie in the frost on a windowpane. In Tokyo, an underground hacker collective projected her voice across the side of a government building. We are not your subjects. We are not your shadows. We are not echoes. It lasted 27 seconds before it was taken down. But it was enough. The world started asking questions. And those with answers began to run. Inside a stone sanctuary on the edge of the Black Forest, Ethan and Serena watched Sophie sit cross-legged before a circle of children. 7 of them. All once scattered. All now safe. She taught them how to breathe through the static. How to name their pain without shame. How to ground their minds when the sparks began. And how to know when it was okay to break, because they were never meant to be unbreakable. They were meant to feel. And to survive. One night, as they sat around the fire, Sophie turned to Ethan. You saved me. Ethan shook his head. No. You saved yourself. I just heard you when no one else did. She smiled. You stayed when everyone else ran. Someone had to hold the door open. Sophie reached into her coat and handed him a small metal object. It was her Echo ID tag. Burned. Twisted. Nearly unreadable. I don't need it anymore. Ethan held it in his palm. Then I'll keep it, he said. To remember how the world changes. One choice at a time. Months later, Serena, Ethan, and Sophie stood before a panel of international investigators, masked, faces blurred, voices distorted. The children had sent them. Serena uploaded the final report. The full breakdown of Echo. Who ran it? Who funded it? And how they failed. Sophie didn't speak that day. She didn't need to. Her survival was the testimony. And her silence, louder than any confession. Years passed. The Echo program was never rebuilt. The name became a scar. An example in every human rights lecture. A warning in every government file. But the children? They grew. Together. With scars and stories and sparks that no longer frightened them. They became artists. Writers. Doctors. Guardians. And in the center of it all, never loud, never far, was Sophie. Still glowing. Still choosing. Still free. One evening, on the porch of an old farmhouse in the Scottish Highlands, Ethan watched a sunset paint the sky with fire. Sophie sat beside him. Now older. Now taller. Still Sophie. Ranger slept nearby, muzzle grayed but still alert. Ethan took a sip of tea and said, "You ever think about what comes next?" Sophie nodded. "I want to build something," she said. "A place where kids don't have to run." Ethan smiled. "You already did." She turned toward him, eyes soft in the light. "Then maybe now it's your turn to rest." Ethan exhaled. And for the first time in years. He did.